So we're talking about this word Christology. Anyone want to take a guess at what it means?
Study of Christ.
The study of Christ, right? So Christology. It is the study of who Christ is. Now, different people have different ideas about who Christ is. And so theologians talk about low Christology and high Christology. I have a cousin who would tell you that Jesus is a way shower. He's not the Son of God. He's not the Messiah. He's a way shower. That would be a low Christology. John 1, the guy that walked and talked with Jesus. The guy that walked and talked with Jesus, he says that Jesus is God. That is very high Christology. So right out of the box, John makes sure that we understand that Jesus is God. And he always has been. And he always will be. So then the question becomes this. What does that mean for us? I've told you that when I teach from the Bible, I want to know three things. What does it say? What does it mean? And how can I apply it to my life? And I want you to know that too. When I teach about the Bible, I want you to know what it says, what it means, and how you can apply it to your life. Here's how I think we can apply John 1, verses 1 through 18 to our life. The first thing is that this high Christology should inform our worship. If Jesus is God, then we are to be worshiping with our very lives. It should also impact the way we live. If Jesus is God, he has the power to change us for the better, to make us more like him. And in fact, if we are in Christ, that relationship should change us. It will change us. It can't not change us. So if our information about Christ, if our time at Cornerstone, if our time at church, if our time at youth group, whatever it is, doesn't change us, hasn't changed us, this is hard. This is a harsh thing to say. I believe it's a truth. It's probably because we don't want to be changed. We're resisting being changed. We'd rather remain unchanged, but still go to heaven. To live the way we want to live, but still have the benefit of eternal life. If that's true of any one of us, we need to examine our hearts. Because we're living in rebellion toward God. Listen, we will never be perfect this side of heaven. I'm not perfect. You're not perfect. Nobody's perfect. But our desire should be to become more and more like Jesus. Our desire should be not to sin, but to rather to become more and more like Jesus. And over time, we should be able to see how we are becoming more like Jesus. So here's how I'm going to end this lecture, and then we're going to jump right into the next one. I want to invite you, I want to give you an invitation. Just test you. To see if what he says is true. So that's the end of the lecture on John 1, 1, and 2. I'm just going to leave that rolling. And then I'm going to go back and change PowerPoints, and you're going to open your books. So you're going to turn in your books to the teacher lesson, and then we'll pick up there. So this story that we're about to talk about is the well-known miracle of Jesus and changing the water into wine. And we're going to begin with a little bit. I'm going to read the whole passage, and then I'll give you a little bit of background on this. So this is John 2, verses 1 through 11, when they say this. On the third day, there was a wedding at Cana in Galilee, and the mother of Jesus was there. Jesus also was invited to the wedding with his disciples. When the wine ran out, the mother of Jesus, Mary, said to him, "They have no wine." And Jesus said to her, "Woman, what does this have to do with me? My hour has not yet come." We'll talk about that word hour as we go through John. It's an important word. And his mother said to the servants, "Do whatever he tells you." Now, there were 6 stone jars there for the Jewish rites of purification, each holding about 20 or 30 gallons. Jesus said to the servants, "Fill the jars with water," and they filled them up to the brim. And he said to them, "Now draw some out and take it to the master of the feast." So they took it. When the master of the feast tasted the water now become wine and did not know where it came from, though the servants who had drawn the water, the master of the feast called the bridegroom and said to him, "Everyone serves the good wine first, and when people have drunk freely, then the poor wine. But you have kept the good wine until now." This is the first of his signs Jesus did at Cana in Galilee and manifested his glory, and his disciples believed in him. So that's the story, and I'm going to talk about it a little bit. I'm not going to go into it into great detail because we're going to look at it again through the study I wrote on called "In Search for Jesus," and I took out some things that are in your supposed to be in your lecture. Some of them because it just didn't seem important, but also some of it I disagree with. So I'll explain those as we get to it. So this happens in Galilee, which is in the northern part of Israel. This is the Sea of Galilee, and if you remember, it's in the northern part. And we're going to see where Canaan is in a little bit, but it's not far from Nazareth. It's fairly close to Nazareth, and that's in part why Mary is involved, and it may have even been a relative of Mary's. So this is the first recorded miracle in John, and it takes place in Galilee. Now remember, what part of Jerusalem? I just gave it away. The part of Israel that John focuses on is Jerusalem. But this is one of 3 events that take place in Galilee. The Synoptic Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, take place primarily in Galilee and not so much in Jerusalem. Remember that those synoptic gospels were all written before John, and John would have read them. So part of his focus on Jerusalem, part of it, would be that so that the other side. So you've heard all about Galilee. Now let's talk about Jerusalem. The other thing is that if you're going to talk about Jesus as the Word was with God and the Word was God, you want to talk about the fulfillment of those things that showed that he was God. A lot of those happened in Jerusalem. Now, your book says this is Jesus' first miracle. Maybe. It's his first recorded miracle. Maybe he had a miracle before that. And this first miracle takes place at a wedding in Cana. Years and years ago, when Katie, who's now 25, was about 3 or 4 years old, I was asked to teach the preschoolers at what was ostensibly a vacation Bible school. It was families at night kind of thing. That was all the rage back then. And so the first story the story on the first night was this story, the wedding at Cana. So I tell it, and I tell it in a way that preschoolers will understand. And I was feeling pretty good about it. These little kids were sitting there listening to me, sometimes better than the teenagers do. And I got done, and the director of the women's ministries, whose name was Donna, and the best way I can describe Donna is she looked like a former Miss Georgia in the Miss America pageant. She was very pretty. She had this cute little Southern accent, and she came up to me afterward and she said, "You are the best preschool Bible teacher ever. You are going to be my preschool Bible teacher forever. I don't ever want anyone to teach preschool but you." And I said, "Well, thank you. That's really nice." Went home. The next morning, we're at the breakfast table, and Jeff says to Katie, "Katie, did your mommy teach you in church last night?" And Katie said, "Yes, she did." And Jeff said, "Well, what did she teach you about? What story did she tell you?" And she said, "She told us a story about when Jesus got married." And so I went back to Donna and I said, "You know what, however good you thought I was last night, I wasn't that good because my own kid didn't get the story." So Jesus isn't actually getting married here, but he is an attendant of this wedding that we're going to talk about. So this is in Cana, which, as you can see, is not far from Nazareth. If I go back, you can see Nazareth, and it kind of is a very short walk away. Now, it begins with saying, "On the third day," and this is where we get into timing, and this is where I skip a whole bunch of stuff, because I don't agree with the curriculum, and it's not the most important thing. The curriculum is saying that there's a day zero, and it's the third day since his first disciples were called. So the first day is the day that he's with John the Baptist and Andrew and John meet him, and then the second day he gets more disciples, and then on the third day he arrives at Cana. The problem with that, it would take about 36 to 40 hours to walk from somewhere down here where he was baptized up to Cana, and it really doesn't leave time for that. Now they make up for that by saying there's a 0 day. The 0 day is the first day, and then the second day, and then the first day, the second day, and then the third day. The problem with that is that's not how ancient Jews counted time. There was no 0 day. The day something happened was the first day. So if we're saying, if I'm saying 3 days from now, today's day 1, not day 0. The other problem with that is it would have taken a while. So I think on the third day means on the third day of his journey. So whenever he journeyed from Judea, don't know exactly where in Judea, on the third day, and if you're going to walk for 40 hours, that's a lot of walking, right? So on the third day, they came to Cana. That's what I think. So Cana was this kind of insignificant little village about a half hour's walk from Nazareth. But Jesus shows up here. The Lord of the universe shows up here, and his first recorded miracle is here. He didn't seek out glory. He didn't even say, "Shazam, be wine," right? The only people that knew what happened were his disciples, probably his mom, but maybe not even for sure his mom, and the attendants, the servants. That's it. It wasn't some big public display, very unlike the faith healers of our day, who give a lot of attention to themselves and a lot of glory to themselves when they heal someone, and that might even be in air quotes. So on the third day, and I would say the third day of his journey, he shows up at Bethlehem, or not at Bethlehem, in Canaan. Now, this is the outline. We're not going to talk about the time. I already just told you what I'm going to tell you about the timing of it and what I think is. But we're going to talk about the ceremony. We're going to talk about the guest list. We're going to talk about the problem, the solution, and the results. We're not going to talk about all of that today. So the time of the event is, as I said, on the third day, which I believe is the third day from the beginning of his journey. And we're skipping. I'm sorry if you end up with some things that are left out, but we're going to go to the ceremony now. Here's how weddings worked in ancient Israel. The groom and his attendants, his groomsmen we would call them, would get torches and instruments, and they'd have this big parade, this big procession over to the bride's house. And they would get the bride and her attendants, and they would have this big procession back to the groom's house, where there would be a wedding feast. There would be a feast for the wedding. It was a large meal with many people, family, friends all gathered around. And the party could last up to 7 days. It depended a little bit on how wealthy you were. So it says, on the third day there was a wedding in Cana in Galilee. The mother of Jesus was there. Jesus also was invited to the wedding with his disciples. So the groom comes for the bride. They return to his house. They celebrate the wedding feast. And this whole thing could take from 2 to 7 days. If you weren't so wealthy, 2 days. If you were very wealthy, 7 days. We don't know how wealthy these people are. We don't know how long this wedding lasted. But we do know that it was a huge event. And they ran out of wine. They didn't have enough wine. And to run out of anything at something as important as a wedding feast was a disgrace. Palestine is an Eastern culture, and Eastern cultures tend to be shame cultures, where the worst thing that you can possibly do is to bring shame on your family. And to be shamed is the worst possible thing that could happen. So this would be shameful. It wouldn't just be, let's just go to Hy-Vee and wine. That's not possible. But even more, it would be a shame on the whole family that they didn't plan, that they didn't get what was needed. It would be an unforgivable error to run out of wine, and yet, or food, or whatever, and yet they did. And so there's you've studied this in English, like the problem has to be overcome. I can't remember the name for it. The what? The conflict. There's the conflict right there. Is what Mary says. They have no wine. The wine's gone. And he brings that to Jesus. We'll pick up here tomorrow and finish this up.